Okay, thank you all. I hope everybody got a chance to walk around and see all of the pinned up projects, and I hope you got to see the presentation this morning. I think one of the things we wanted to do, since we have critics from outside the school here, is to get their thoughts, impressions on what they saw today, and we will certainly invite others. Our faculty are here, and we'll give you the microphone too, and any comments you'd like to make, we would certainly welcome them. Maybe I'll just open by maybe just asking everyone, if we could, anyone pass the mic around, just have opening comments or any opening. Somebody has to say something. You're up there for a purpose.
Start down there.
How do you start?
Yeah. So maybe somebody could just say something about their just overall or just general impressions, and then we'll go around from there. Fair, Alan?
Sure.
Okay, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I guess I'll go. I have the mic.
Yeah.
It was really nice. It was impressive to see sort of the use of narrative across the board in a lot of explicit ways, but also sort of implicit ways. It really showed through, I think, in a lot of the projects. And it seemed like that was something that people were going for, so that was a good sign. I think all the underlying issues can kind of come together under maybe that one umbrella. So as architects, it's a good thing to think about because it's somewhere that we really have, I think we have a lot of agency in that kind of teasing out some of those stories and histories and narratives and stuff.
I really appreciated the diversity of themes, like across the board, and I mean they were a really wide range, and which is not common, like within educational environments or other schools. I come from the from the West Coast, and so where there's always, there seems to be like a much more uniform, kind of understanding of what what Thesis is and how they present, even though very diverse issues. But then, through representational mediums or just through the way that projects are expressed and articulated, they tend to be all the same. So I really appreciated the diversity. I was struck by the fact that like a lot of international students, in a way, were extremely interested in exploring issues that are intrinsic to their culture, but then they're bringing them into or putting them in a context that is very foreign to that. So then the thesis started to express this really, I think, productive. I wouldn't say hybrid, but then a context where from the moment that they're decontextualizing those issues and placing them in a new environment, I think that's extremely rich, not just for the culture of the school, but also the culture from where they're coming from. So I was really impressed. And in general, I think the quality of the work was incredible.
Someone can say, you don't all have to say
so
nice
nice.
things.
Yeah.
Say not nice things. But don't just say something nasty now.
Okay, well, let me just reframe it a little bit, I guess. Some of the comments about the way that Syracuse seemed to take this process as this kind of journey for all of the students, and I had the same sort of thinking with the foreign students, that they were able to really nuance and tease out a lot of cultural aspects. And I had just come from Penn, where everybody's just working on a very different project that doesn't have any contingencies. So this issue of contingency to me was kind of very critical and pretty interesting. To kind of tease out other things that are not always positive, I guess. I think that there's a way to look at history in a way that may be a little more projective, a little more nuanced sometimes, because I think that it could, for me, as a political stance, it could derive on something that is either escapist or authoritarian. So while I really enjoyed and appreciated some of that work, and I thought it was amazing, I had a kind of political reaction to it. I think that was.
What do you mean? I'm curious.
Well, I think that there were, certain narratives, certain typologies that manifested themselves as very legibly and operatively in a way where this notion of the historical referent was there to create an alter reality that wasn't necessarily filtered through other contemporary thinking that is taking place potentially. So
I think it's okay to
Yeah.
refer to specific projects
Yeah.
relative to these
You mean
themes.
Boulez?
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand this better. There should be overt connections made between the reference of Boulez to contemporary political issues. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just thinking that as I approached those projects, I was very conscious that they were very specific in the way that one is meant to experience them, which is the goal. But that at a certain point, and this is a personal, I guess one of the things that I was trying to say through this comment is that as much as I was looking at how a hypothesis became contested, became research, there's also a very key element, which is personal interest that goes into your decision making,
Sure.
basically. So in terms of my decision making, the projects which I thought were fantastic, I was swayed in other direction because I had a certain uneasiness with their representation as being very kind of factual and sort of. I think I can just leave it at that.
It's clear you're uneasy. I'm not sure what you're uneasy about, but maybe we'll.
Yeah.
Because or here. The microphone is here. Yes, please.
Maybe just,
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Okay, I'll just maybe add into that, would it be something like, 'cause I was also surprised at the recurrence of Boulez and the interest in typology. I think it's maybe interesting for you to think about now as you look over the thesis project and what this might mean. I think I could see some discomfort with, as you look at some of these things, maybe again you could see the history of how some of these forms have been used in later sort of architectures, how they're related to certain political systems. But there might be something else that you're doing with this, and I am kind of interested to see maybe what that might be. Is Boulez here like a representation of some kind of power that you see working in society kind of in a different way? Why does it end up being cited here? But I think one of the interesting things, though, to think about with the thesis, this would be, I don't know if I want to do like a mild criticism, because I think that there was a lot of course, very nice work, very great work. But one of the things as you look back, I think a number of things were presented almost with a kind of sequentiality. Like I could look at it and see, okay, here's where you began. You started looking at these precedents. Here's the evidence of that, and here's where you went. And okay, and this is the thesis. In some ways, the thesis, to paraphrase someone, the thesis at its best is a kind of animal, and it starts to have its own behaviors, its own territory that it wants to make. And in some cases, the history of how you got there might be less important now than what, as you look at, because I think all the projects had some things that were definitely working for them. And how do you isolate these things that are working for a particular project and give these the space to breathe, so they don't need to be maybe held back by certain references that aren't maybe as important or that are maybe more tangential to what you're trying to do.
May I ask whom you were paraphrasing?
I mean, I could say.
No, I mean-
I could be.
No, it would be- I would
I'd
be
say sort of
curious.
it's probably the Louisiana sort of thing. So I'll just.
Yeah, no, I thought it was someone we might know. Okay.
Do you guys need a microphone? Yeah, it's better. I'm just curious to know how many parents are in the room.
You mean of these students?
Yeah. Sorry. I'm impressed that there are parents of students in the room. But I will say this sort of as a disclaimer that, I always think, what are you thinking when you see all of this? And what are you thinking when you don't have this language and you're hearing this kind of discussion? It's all alien. You're asking, what am I paying for? So I just think it's always useful if somebody like me can just be really direct, at least to you, as someone who is a parent of a student. So I feel I'm empathetic towards maybe what you're feeling. And then my other disclaimer is because I'm not part of the school, I always like to say this is, I always know if faculty are offended by how many people come out to lunch afterwards by what my words will end up saying. So I feel like I just wanted to sort of explain that when I was going through this, listening to all of the narratives, the students spend a year on this, so I thought, that's always impressive just from a kind of ability to spend a year on a project. I broke it down by category, and I just wanted to share this with you because I think it's important for everyone to understand how the work stacks up through my own classification. The way I saw it, there was one project that dealt with an environmental challenge, two that dealt with I would say a perceivable cultural or economic challenge, four that dealt with sacred space or space in general, one that dealt with I would call object fetishness, which is actually quite remarkable for an architecture school to only have one project there. Two that dealt with tectonics, three that dealt with technology, but in a category I would say technology without resistance, meaning there was no kind of important question being asked from this technology. Least favorite of mine, five of them that were sort of stuck in narrative post-structural world. Interpreting imagery, that kind of stuff, writing new narratives. And then one that was anti-architectural, which is always good to see from my perspective, seeing that I'm not an architect, and there's a strong resistance to pushing the medium in new directions. I just wanted to reference four projects, if I could, to point out the work. I thought one of the most remarkable project was from Sharif, which had, it was a project on informal housing in Cairo, which I thought had a very strong cultural, economic, global imperative. I'm not sure if all of you are aware of the scale of this problem, but I thought Sharif really addressed this, and I would highly commend that project. It's not always a theoretical project that stands out. To me, it's always the one that I think, at least from where I am, my perspective in the kind of ethos of where I teach at MIT, which is sort of solving the world's greatest challenges. Sometimes it's a little narrow for people, but I just find that project really resonated with me. Alexandra's project about tapping energy beneath, there's something about that project that also resonated with me from its analysis, also to me, a really clear kind of analytical transition in the Rust Belt, which I think is also an important place to be looking as an urbanist. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Blur out. Is it Hi? Hayram. I like that project because it's the anti-architectural project dealing with environmental phenomena and trying to figure out how to make people more aware of the invisible forces around us. That has endless potential, and I wish you luck as you move onward into your master's study to figure that out. And fourthly, I thought one of the really interesting projects was Trang with the augmented reality project. And I said this to you in the room, but I'll share my comments with everybody else here. Is Trang, is I thought that your project, where are you actually? Somewhere, you're in the back.
Yeah.
I thought your project had a lot of potential. But I thought it was sort of apolitical, and I think that if you start And you also sort of never told us what you actually did. So I pressed you up in the room, but you wrote an app. You got into the sort of technical aspects of translating physical form into technological language. Not easy to do. Moreover, I think building that off of the kind of semiological work in the field, I think, is not also that difficult, or is difficult to do, and trace that back to Venturi's work. And for me, it's more important, though, to ask the question, if you can change what the facade means, what's the political message there? And how is it disseminated in this kind of informal network of technology that we're all using to communicate now through social networking, and the visibility of that kind of system? And I think you need to push that. It's a strong project, but I think it needs a political backbone. And moreover, my last comment is, and this is probably the one that will get me in the most trouble, I'm really concerned, actually, that the student body isn't all that interested in a kind of political resistance. Maybe that's part of the program. Maybe it's the mixture of undergrads and grads. Maybe it's the theory and history that's embedded in the program. I don't know these things, so you have to don't hold it against me. But from young people, seeing what's going on around us, I would imagine that you have stronger opinions about how your field and what you do every day and the materiality you use can change something demonstrable in how we behave and how we think about our culture and our society and the normal things that we do. And I didn't find a lot of that in the work, and I'm concerned about that. And so I think that's all I'll say for now.
Thank you.
So I come here from a very different tradition, a different school. I've been an administrator in a different kind of program, and so, you know, Syracuse Thesis has a reputation, or always had one, of being sort of strong theory. And so when I was invited, I was attracted to come and see that. I felt like it was forbidden fruit for me. That was like going into a candy store, being on a strict diet, that I could kind of come and indulge, but not really take. And, in doing so, I had to kind of restrain maybe being a little snarky about it in my own mind and keeping an open mind. And throughout, I think I was engaged by many of the projects, and some of them less so, but I'm not going to really delve into that. But I do agree that we are living through a powerful moment in time, and I wonder sometimes of the value of kind of withdrawing into a year of being a bit of a hermit, like Thoreau on the pond, with just a few faculty and kind of connecting and getting really involved in something, to then move on to suddenly the door opens and you're out into the crowd, and there's a lot of noise, and you have to kind of make how do you then proceed with that? And we take a different strategy at my school. We're very specific about the technical preparation, and less so about thesis as being this moment of kind of the last kind of moment of respite before you go into a professional world where, frankly, you're never going to be able to really indulge in this kind of work unless you find that particular sponsor or that particular academy that's going to let you do that. Those of you that go out to be practicing architects, you will look back on this with a profound nostalgia. So in that sense, it was kind of delicious to see the work. But I found certain themes that were sort of interesting. Does this work have an afterlife, or does it end now? And I tried to ask most of the people that I spoke with that, and I got some interesting answers. One sort of Max said, "I'm going to out you here for a second. I'm not going to think about this for three years, right?" Which is a great response, because that's actually a great thing, because when you do think about it in 3 years, you're going to have so many insights into it. And I think for all of you, many of you, the sort of digital spatial world, you're going to keep working on this tonight. I would encourage you maybe to sort of take the summer off, and maybe get back to it to give you a little bit of distance in that. But in that sense, I wondered, the value of this. To take a year and draw, and build and print and model, And I think some of the drawing in many ways was gratuitous. And I asked a lot of you, is there one particular thing that you got out of the drawing that you didn't know already beforehand? And I think for those of you that answered, or maybe think about that question, was it valuable? And use that and bank that for sort of future, if in the future I have a similar kind of problem this is the way that I can get to it through some form of representation. And always in that representation, I think you have to consider your audience. I think you probably knew who your audience was, people sitting in the front row in the building, and that's a very specific audience, but that representation always has that other that is ultimately attached to it. Again, I found the narrative as being sort of uniquely related to this moment. This, I too saw the Boulay-Ledoux kind of connection, thinking that was a revolutionary moment. And a lot of that work was there because it's just, the world was in chaos and nobody was building. And so maybe it's not a bad time to kind of withdraw into a theoretical narrative that in some cases I sensed there was a deep irony in that. That may be speaking to this political situation in a very sort of quiet way, and maybe that irony should be sort of broadcast out on the internet. So just to kind of call out three projects, Max's project, again, what sort of struck me about it was, in some ways it was, and I think you said this, it was kind of like Cornell from 20 years ago, that you're sort of lapsing back into Collage City. I think in the world of sort of, there's all of that stuff is flattened now, and all of that information is readily available to us, and so what is kind of in or out or something doesn't sort of matter anymore, and the way that I think you've taken Collage City and turned it into a meme was a kind of innovative and powerful thing. Anna and Domenica, I think of all the projects that maybe you captured the kind of the moment now of a sort of millennial generation moving through design, using particular tools, applying certain things that are very critical maybe of contemporary practice. And the last one I want to call out, Russell
Shear.
Russell Shear. Thank you. Did I get the names backwards? There's a narrative in there that you didn't bring out. About how you got there, and that was probably one of the more direct, highly politicized ones. And then there's a personal narrative in that came through in many ways as revolutionary, in that sense, detached yet attached at the same time. So really being able to kind of hedge both those worlds in a way that may be a path to get us through this time.
Of course. Yeah.
We can go. I just.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I felt like I was put in the spot to say something that wasn't as kind. I was sort of contested.
You were.
Contested. Which, yeah. I also I sort of made a taxonomy too of projects that was very useful, and I want to return back to this idea of range, which I think is very remarkable for a school. I think it's very healthy, an environment where you have this kind of range of work. And you can see lineage in it, but you can see some cross-pollination too. So I thought that was pretty amazing. The question of representation too, I thought that at some times maybe it wasn't as sort of necessary, but I think overall, and as a discipline, potentially all the projects that dealt with domesticity as a way. So the way in which there was a series of architectural tools that were produced through representation and modeling to take very abstract notions of domesticity and make them operative spatial material. I thought that was very, very remarkable work because it's that's a discourse that has been around for maybe 25 years now, and it never seems to get traction. Like a lot of this discourse never get traction because the disciplinary tools are never set up, so you're never able to produce much with them. So the way in which all of the students here took on the necessary process to a thesis to generate these disciplinary tools for concepts as abstract as domesticity or history. I thought that was one of my biggest takeaways from the day, and it's not easy to do. And like in some cases, I'm just going to say one project about that. In Yangsong, hi. So I was trying to, because like all this tectonic discussion was really remarkable and the taxonomy of the joints, but you had done all this other work that was simulation, that was about tension, compression. So I think to me that that representational work of simulation and the way that it made it into a tectonic language was more important than the kind of finishing work of just representing this joinery, because there's a process there of invention that you need to still cross that gap to generate further tools. So I would urge you to go back and look at those drawings that are more technical and find a way to get that.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about specific projects. I don't want to talk about specific projects, but then I'm going to use this project in particular to talk about something else. And I think, this is something that I appreciated, but I also have a little bit of a conflict of interest, or mixed feelings about, which is I really appreciated the specificity of that project. Just like getting into kind of like construction detail, you kind of get more narrow and specific than that. And on the other extreme, there were projects where they were dealing with very generic aspects, still very legitimate concerns, yet I'm wondering what is the status of Thesis as a format? It is just about a very personal inquiry, and then you just take it whatever you want and you stop it. Is this just a frozen moment, or is it just a moment that takes place within a much larger trajectory? Like, how do you evaluate failure and success? Right, so I think, and this is not happening just in the context of this specific school. I think this is something that many different institutions are dealing with. And what is it? And so in a way, and that's why I'm saying that I have conflicted feelings, because I did appreciate this very openness or open-end condition that these projects have. That in some cases where just the end of the thesis was just promoting a question. In some cases, it was about, very speculative, in terms of tectonics, as it was in the case of the joints and so on and so forth. So I think this is a very, it's a discussion that is interesting to have, just because I think it's in a way the container that holds all this work together. And as one of you said before, what is next? How do you use this in the future? It is, something that, begins almost as something that will form your career in the future. Of course, this is not the best work that you have produced or that you are going to be producing in your life, hopefully, because it's just the beginning of your career as an architect. But then, how can you place it within a much larger environment?
I just want to make just a couple of comments to address some points that were made. Maybe to your opening comment, Georgina, and then maybe to Alan's. Of course, any school that does Thesis has a discussion every time they do it about the basic difference between a thesis and a project. Yeah, how is this somehow more ambitious than a normal project? One of the weird things that you'll see is typically in most schools, the first year projects are typically better than the thesis projects. And why is that? Because they are executed in such a way that the students do precisely and exactly what the instructor has told them to do. They have a set of rules, they follow them, and they execute those precisely. So you go into a studio of first year work, and it's often exciting and fantastic to see how in the first year these students have done such an amazing thing, but they have done so because largely it's been fairly well scripted. And I think that is true in some schools. Some schools on the West Coast, some of which I'm very familiar with, use Thesis basically as an advertisement for the ideology and the agenda of the school. It comes down to even sets of techniques and colors. Yeah. So if you vary violet and it should be red, then you're not in the school and you're part of some other discussion. I find that personally incredibly limiting and somewhat objectionable, and it should maybe be consigned to the discussion about what happens in first year, because basically you're given instructions and you follow them. I think similarly, if we were to take the project, Roger Julie's advisee Young's project, how would I make that project political, and what does political mean? If by political you are asking the students to state what's at stake in the project and then tell what that project does in relation to that statement of what's at stake, then I would say, of course. But if you're asking the students to make all of their projects reflect conditions that obtain in this room, outside this room, in the state, in the country, whatever, wherever, I think that is no less prescriptive than what we do in first year and what many schools do in terms of determining an agenda for what the students do. Here, students go through a very rigorous core. Then they have an opportunity at a certain point to travel. That is to say, they can go to Florence, London, New York, or elsewhere, or they can do visiting critic studios. And in all those travel opportunities and in those visiting critic studios, the idea is to give students a variety of things that they can use to add to whatever it is that will make them an architect in whatever way they want to practice it. And in some ways, I think the thesis project is the final distillation of whatever that is. I think it would be incredibly politically, just to invoke a term that I feel somewhat uncomfortable with because I don't think everybody uses it the same way, I think it would be politically very incredibly unsavory to demand that all the projects that students do be political in some kind of way that some of us understand to be political. I would say some of the projects that deal with domesticity, for example, are political in ways that are not overtly political. Are they a critique of the current administration? Perhaps, but that maybe is not what's at stake in domesticity. Maybe something else. So I think we have to be very. I think we should either be very circumspect, very careful, or we should be very explicit when we say these projects are limited because they're not revolutionary or political. Then let's say what do you mean by that? So I think it's very important to understand what's at stake. What are they doing and what's at stake? And many of them don't say that in their presentations. It is a year-long project, but it's a year-long project where they do thesis prep, and then they develop their project with faculty. Let's remember, these students are all guided and directed by faculty who have some of these same kinds of interests. So they're not creating these things in a vacuum. I think just because we're in upstate New York doesn't mean that because we have not developed theses that are of the caliber of the 18th Brumaire, that they're not political. I think there are ways in which they are very explicitly political, but maybe you just can't see them because your political ears aren't tuned to things that people of this generation may be attuned to. I'm certainly not. I was trained as a Marxist cultural theorist. Do I find these projects political? Of course. Do I find that they should be, reciting passages from Capital, Volume 1, Commodity Chapter Section? No, I don't think they necessarily need to do that. The fact that they state what they state and they challenge what they challenge, and if the projects then succeed against that, fine. Many of them don't state what they're trying to do. For example, the project, the shot code, the QR project. I love that project. The very first thing I would have said if that were my project is I designed the apps. We didn't even know that.
Yeah,
We didn't even know that she designed the apps. And then we don't know after we know that she designed the apps, we don't know that in fact what we see through the viewfinder that she actually designed that too. We know she did, but so it's a fantastic project, but its larger ambitions are not stated, so it's very hard to judge against those ambitions that were not stated what it does or doesn't do. So I find the range of things incredibly exciting, because for me what it means is it reflects a range of faculty interest. I think the time where schools are directed top-down by a dean or by 5 faculty who like 9 squares or 10 points or 7 things, and everybody has to do that, thank God that's over with, except in certain places where it still obviously needs to be stamped out. So those are my comments. Julia, do you have anything to say? And
yeah,
I'm happy to
I
talk
was
more.
just, I want to hear, no. I just want to say 2 things. Because Mark Linder's not here, I just want to, within this pamphlet, there's a wonderful little introduction to Thesis, and I just wanted to say one thing that's really kind of an extension of what Georgina was saying, and relative to contextualizing within our school. And it says, thesis is no longer a test of general competency across the subject areas of our curriculum as it once was. Our discipline and our world are far too uncertain today for that kind of squandering of potential. Thesis is now a test of each student's ability to achieve what he or she can imagine as the most compelling possibilities for architecture today. And I think that's the sort of things we saw, stated or not stated. And I would say for the students, I think the more successful presentations, not necessarily projects or vice versa, were those that made a pitch and didn't just report a process or report on their work. I think there were far more interesting projects on the walls that might have come off in the presentation that's sort of flat. So you're making a pitch, you're making an argument, and I think some of them were more successful at that. And so, in this last sentence, the idea of imagining the most compelling possibilities for architecture, and then I'm interested in, the categorization of what architecture is and what is not. It is not by some of the critics, right, relative to its potentials. And particularly, when you say anti-architectural, Alan, what you really mean, I think, is it's anti-object, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
or the object is founded in the process of some kind, and that's what I found interesting about the project. But I will say this, though, that opening up your culture to outsiders to let us take the temperature is always an interesting experience, and it's very healthy to do, even though some find it not so comfortable. So this is an experiment. It always is for me, and I think it always is for the schools that do it, and it's healthy to do it. I will say this, though, to have a top-down ideology in the school around Marxism wouldn't be such a bad thing at this point in time, though. I would be all for that if you wanted to experiment with it. But in all seriousness, I think
I suspect people who may have lived in countries where that was the case.
I'm sure. But I just want to say one thing. There's a difference between being resistant and being political. And I think if you're going to spend, like I've said, for me, it's just really unusual to come into a room of young people and not find, I would even use the word, a kind of direct passion. And I know it's in your work because you've spent a year on it and you really care about it. It's just not obvious to the outsider. And I would say if you're going to spend any more time with your work, what I would do if I were you is I would give yourself 30 seconds to pitch your idea, not 5, and tell us what's most important about what it will change first, and use that as a stepping stone for the future, because it seems to me that the longer you do this, the less time you have people to listen to you. And the more people there are out there, the less patience they have to listen to you. In the field, the essence of the idea is so critical to put at the beginning. I think we're hearing that in some of the critique of the day. And I think that's probably part of a little bit of my frustration. Obviously, I bring my own baggage in here. I never heard the word climate change. I mean, I have my own passion about what millennials think and where they should be going, and that's my baggage. So you have to excuse that. But I do think, if you don't make your pitch, and I think you're hearing this, and you don't demonstrate your passion at the beginning, you're disconnecting from the audience, and that's a lesson to take forward as you move into a professional environment.
They gave you 5 minutes, so
Set your timer on your phone.
I kind of wanted to go back to this idea that you mentioned earlier about narrative and how it's sort of an outmoded structuralist thought. That kind of stuff never really dies. It doesn't just end when we decide that theory's not du jour anymore. And I think it also kind of relates to some of these other ideas about what Michael was saying about being political, that it doesn't always have to be just we are into architectural labor, or we hate Donald Trump. It can be a lot of these things are in fact some of the things that you mentioned too are Egyptian housing and preserving Chinese tectonic traditions and addressing social media. All these things are actually super contemporary in how we address globalization, but also the internet. And I think these are super interesting things for architects to be talking about, because it's kind of the place where all these ideas come together in a way, is how we articulate our solutions to things like the Cincinnati project had a sort of a component to it as well. It maybe could have been that maybe, you know, is really provocative. I think all these projects kind of come together, and it kind of also goes to what you're saying about sometimes we weren't sure what they were, like the VR thing or the AR thing. We weren't really sure maybe what that was about, but that's what the designer does, is makes that sort of more not necessarily explicit, but teases that out formally and brings these ideas of the interesting things that you're talking about, you know, become sort of articulated in form. So I think that's still a super important aspect of architecture, especially.
I had one other comment. The going back to that previous comment a little bit, as a way to unpack that a little further, I think that it would be positive also to think of other modalities of thesis in a way of what the results of them are, because it seems like some of the projects were always going towards the projectual or towards the design end, but in a way they could have been other reflections. So some of the historical city work in Europe, for example, that could have unfolded itself as a different product, potentially. Or some of the technology work also could unfold itself differently, like in a different format. So I think that if anything, maybe the constructs of what was to be delivered might be encasing some of the research a little bit. But I would say that the project of the gas tanks was one of those projects, for example, and I wish it hadn't necessarily relied itself towards the space making or the form making of those models, but sort of found procedures by which to create categories or taxonomies, for example. And it seemed like there were 5 or 6 other projects that maybe were leaning more towards, you know, papers or other research. So I'm wondering at one point, like, when you make that decision to go forth with drawings or to go forth with a building, or whether you can kind of open up that format to
Interesting. Other deliverables.
other deliverables.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I felt that there was something productive, even in the sense that a number of the projects, I mean, I guess I could say even in general, there was a certain amount of unclarity to all of them that I could kind of imagine going through project by project. And I think those things are also really interesting and productive. And I think one thing that I think is very interesting and encouraging is I think the sense to which I think all the projects really wrestled with the history of architecture, with this, and not just architectural history, but with the whole set of methodologies and ways of communicating, of thinking about images, of representing space, of saying what's important in space, in saying, you know, why should we, you know, talk about space in this way or that way. That each of these projects really, I think, wrestled with that. And it's kind of like I don't know, it's like a python eating a horse or something like that. And I'm imagining that in some ways these projects have just swallowed this giant thing and are trying to digest it. It hasn't been digested yet. You're still maybe digesting it. You know, still trying to understand how you, as a practicing architect, can work through this discipline, through this way of communicating that is architecture, and that is, you know, has a history, both, you know, just the history of buildings, the history of methods. And it's interesting to see this attempt to try to, which I think is a very genuine attempt in all these projects, to try to find some kind of personal agency, some kind of way to engage with some kind of issue that's really important to you, to say that I can express myself, I can express something that I want to express about things that are very important to me through this language. And you know, it's hard to do. It's hard to get some kind of facility. It's hard to say, like, how do I, you know, pull in this precedent or that precedent. So in some ways it looks maybe more academic and less, say, like something as we could build, or something that has a very clear kind of political statement, because it's still about getting kind of a mastery of a kind of language. But I mean, I think it's kind of one of the things that stood out to me is almost a theme that went throughout is I mean, as I could give as a kind of an overall problematic, if I had to, for all this work would have to do with thinking about the relationship between virtual sorts of mediated social spaces and the way that we think about space and architecture. And it's hard to talk about these things together. It's hard to communicate about the kind of lives I think that we have now, kind of a technologically mediated life through the discipline of architecture. And it's something that I think is a really interesting problem. And I commend you for taking that on.
Can I say one?
Oh, please.
One last thing? So I have a quick thesis story. I had a student, John, who transferred to our school from RISD in the third year to kind of come and learn computers. So I taught him what I knew about 3D Max. And then he transferred to Cooper into the fourth year at Cooper. And it was a very rare thing that John got in. And I stayed in touch with him. And then around this time of year, he called me on the phone and he was in tears and said, Haydock failed me for for thesis. John Haydock had been his thesis advisor, and he failed him. And John was just crestfallen. I said, this can't be. I mean, I've been to he rented separate space, and I've been to his, unbelievable amount of work, unbelievable amount of process, rigorous ideas, And I said, you got to go talk to him. Haydock refused to see him. He said, go see Henderson. Henderson was the associate dean. And so John goes in to see Henderson, and Henderson says, so you failed your first duty. What does that mean? Well, I've got to come back next year. He says, well, this is Cooper Union. It was still free then. He said, so you're going to school for free, right? So you're going to come back again. And then he listed all the people that Haydock had failed. And it was like a roster of like all these pretty well-known architects who'd gone to Cooper Union. So, and John never heard about this. Maybe he wasn't there at the beginning. He never knew about that tradition, that it was like a great honor to be failed by Haydock because it bought you another year of school. And so, I mean, what I would say, and now Michael's out of the room, maybe you can tell him, the problem with thesis is that they're always a little congratulatory. Like, this is the last thing you did. Are they going to go out like in a big ball of flame and like, oh, I really screwed this project up. I wish I would do it again. But you know what? It's in the failures that we learn. And I think the one thing that I would say here is that in the future, maybe test these projects to failure a bit more. Or of those the 15 or 18 that were not selected, bring in a couple of the failures, people that really took risks. Maybe they had printing problems in the end, or whatever it was. Those risks were sort of failures. I mean, I'm going to call somebody out. So Taylor, we had a conversation about this sort of the analog between sort of domestic and public. Where's Taylor? Yeah, I don't buy it. And Julio brought it up, and I think for 25 years people haven't bought it. Maybe your faculty, should have told you when you initially said, listen, you got 25 years of heritage that, all these other people have tried to do this, and it's still a kind of false dichotomy. It's really hard to make this work. It's apples and vegetables, And maybe to kind of push that to failure and understand, in what way you failed is going to lay a foundation for somebody else doing that work down the road. I was just saying, as you were out of the room.
Oh, I thought I missed it purposely. No, I'm sorry.
You're unbelievably prescient. Allow these projects to kind of push to failure a little bit more. I think we are, there's helicopter parents. You guys are we're helicopter faculty. We all are. That's just the plight that we're in right now. Maybe let's let go of the reins a little bit and let these students just fail.
No, failure is great until it's yours, and it was the last one, right?
That's right. It is the last one, and that's
failure is terrible. You should never set out to fail. You should always set out to do the best, and then if you fail, then you say it was a failure, but it's on the way to a great solution. It is an innovation, right? Whatever. Our faculty, any of our faculty have comments, objections? Like who? I don't know whether to toss it. Should we just screen it, or we want this recorded for posterity?
I wanted to also respond to Alan's comment that I thought he was going to get him into trouble. Maybe not the type of trouble we thought we was going to get you into. But, and I wanted to disagree, but in a different way than Michael disagreed. I think that the political projects, there were maybe one or two that were here that were, we could say, on the edge of explicitly political. Maybe Russell's and Sharif's were on the edge of being explicitly about some kind of political condition that they wanted to address and design through. I think there were, of the 120 plus projects this thesis year, there are probably many, many, many more that were much more explicitly political that unfortunately we're not able to see all today. And I think that is a reflection of the times, and at least the students that I engage with quite a lot, they are always pushed towards answering some of those political questions and pulling them out of the work. And I think maybe it's a comment on the state of our curriculum or the values of our faculty, but maybe some of those political issues aren't as highly valued. So if a lot of those projects get edited out from the thesis period, then maybe we're valuing things such as larger discursive things that aren't specifically embedded in the political higher than the political pieces. So I think that is a moment of self-reflection for us. So I think in that way I agree with you. I don't think it's completely not there. I don't think that students don't have it in them. I think it's just we're not either pulling it out of them in the curriculum leading up to thesis, or we're not congratulating those projects that get there. And I think that connects to this issue about failure. So maybe some of the projects that took on the political more aggressively actually did push to failure and failed in a way of not getting to this final round of evaluation.
So I just want to...
May I just very
Yeah,
quickly,
please.
I just want to
directed
agree
to me.
with Soku in a way
Question
that
was
we
directed to me.
wouldn't have anticipated perhaps. I completely agree that I agree to this extent that in the 60s we have lots of very famous, important political philosophers. Louis Althusser is a very famous one that almost no one here, I'm sure, knows very much about, but that's political, the fact that they don't know that, I would say. Louis Althusser said many things, but one of the things he said is that when everything is political, there is no politics. And so I would say, yes, you can tease out, you can tease out what's at stake in so many of these projects if we go through with that cone. I think, of course, all of our students and all of our faculty feel enormously impacted by what's happening in the world. I think it's very fortunate if we demand that they express in their projects a political reading in opposition to whatever that is in the way that we imagine that should be political. Sharif's project is a fantastic project. It's an amazing urbanism project. It's an amazing, it's a project that deals with a lot of social, political, economic, cultural issues, but does that make it political? I don't know. For some it may, for some it may not. So I feel very strongly about not imposing on our students a demand that they do projects that we feel are political. They may feel these projects are very political, in fact. I have no idea. But I think that they did a great job in what they did, and whether it's political or not for me is absolutely irrelevant. Alan.
So I think your comment is very insightful and gives a little bit more illumination as to the process, and I say that everything that we have seen should be taken in that context. So then my second sort of observation of your comment would be, why did the faculty choose, out of 18 projects, to show us 9 projects that deal with narrative and structuralist kind of issues? That's 50%. Why half? Why did the faculty rank half of them that fall in that kind of category? So it's not a reflection on anyone. It's just an observation that if you show us 18, this is roughly what we see, and so, we have to respond to that. But with the background, you're telling us there seems to be a much larger variety, and so the filter is whoever chose the projects.
And with that, I would say I am absolutely blameless, as I am with the curriculum. On both of those.
Just want to confirm Michael's blameless. I think great set of comments. And the faculty don't know what we're going to see today. It's an interesting process. So I guess from my point of view, it was, as it always is, great to see the range of projects. Some surprises, to be sure, and some disappointments, both in terms of what's been shown, but also what might have been shown. I want to, and I think it's both a reflection, certainly, of the temperature of the school. It's clearly a reflection of the faculty processes that, on the final thesis review, 4 different faculty members, 2 of which have seen the projects, 2 of which haven't seen the project, need to confer a certain kind of grade such that it gets elevated to this point. So I would say it is, to some degree, a reflection of the faculty, to be sure. I think that I'd like to switch the question, or the observation a little bit. I think because a project's political doesn't make it architectural and doesn't make it a good project. So I think that the intent is to, from our point of view, probably to get a student to frame a problem reasonably, to understand the fact that it's a monster, even if it's been framed. Sometimes you're probably going to have to present it in 5 minutes and make it all seem seamless, but in fact it's this big, messy thing that has its own life and death and rebirth. But I would like to think that I would like to find the political in all the projects, in a way. And so I think that there are some that are going to deal with border issues, to be sure. I think that the ones that deal with, we'll take Paul's, that's dealing with Bois-Mer, but also the Lancière, and what's the status of the image today, and I think what constitutes or how we socially and I would say politically deal with the image is of great interest. So I think the territory was interesting. I don't think it was necessarily a political project, but it was a project that started with the problem of the image. So I couldn't go through all the projects, but I think we could go through a lot of them and try to find, even if they weren't particularly well articulated, try to find what is at stake in a kind of social and political way, or what might be at stake. And really then through starting from through the lens of architecture versus starting through the lens of kind of political, social, or ecological issues.
I was just going to respond to that, just to change the vector away from Alan a little bit.
Thank you.
To kind of triangulate a little bit with 2 comments in following up. One of them, and going back to the Boulez work and to the killer ferry in Venice, and I think these are also young architects who are discovering discipline, they're discovering space, they're discovering materials, they're, in a way, they're just fascinated by all its offerings. So the fact that they may refer to other things that are non-political is really healthy. I mean, they've been in this 5 years, they've been to Europe, they're just amazed by this sort of repertoire that the discipline offers. So I think it's a high order to request from them this kind of sort of further action into framing those exercises as overtly political, right? So like the ferry had this amazing section, you know, and the light, and then all of the poche, nobody knew what it was, but you know, it's kind of fine, you know. So I mean, so there was a lot of that work that were just, you know, men, women have been doing this for 5 years, and they're just kind of getting their hands into the repertoire and becoming very facile with some of these aspects. On the other hand, you could also, you know, take the counter argument and say that the thrust of a curriculum could start to foreground certain issues that are very present today, and then all those things would begin to kind of flourish out in some ways. So, you know, there is definitely like a postmodern vector that is coming back in through Chicago, you know, and making its way to the East Coast, you know, that was present today. So the question is that postmodern vector political, non-political? What is their attitude towards, you know, pressing issues today? How are they addressing them? Are they addressing them just by sort of creating a historical spiral that goes through the different processes that have taken place in the past 40 years and creating an enlightened understanding of it? Or, you know, so I think I sort of wanted to qualify my views on the political a little bit, both in the trajectory of very young men and women that have done amazing work, and also in the way in which a school could start to foreground some larger categories that might move beyond the discipline, or that might push the discipline or the different disciplinary vectors we have today to take more of a stance, even if it's tangential towards those things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could, this is all wonderful, but probably we should, maybe I would open this up to some final comments. If people have any overall final comments, maybe about non-political comments.
We have a student.
Oh, anyone? Shall I toss it? No. Oh yeah, yeah, of course, I'll come. No, you do.
Thanks for the discussion. I just wanted to make a comment about what someone said about being a hermit and this whole like thesis process. I would really say that it's like a learned behavior that actually started like from years and years of education, being rewarded for learning segregated subjects like mathematics and all this other stuff, and being taught that you get an A when you can just delve deeper and deeper into this one particular subject without thinking about the larger consequences. So I feel like when you have students working with certain faculty that reward them for delving deeper, which, you know, in the breadth of our education, maybe that's what thesis is about, delving deeper, then you really lose sight of like the interconnectivity of everything and the larger implications of your project, because our framework is that we're living in a neoliberal society where everyone is told to have like a certain title, and that's, you have a boundary for what you're limited to doing, and then you can only go deeper and not outward. So I would say that's a learned behavior rather than something that like intrinsically you can place blame on the thesis students for doing that.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I think maybe, I don't want to go, I don't,
Yeah, could please, by all means, don't let me cut you off, but could we maybe have some wrapping up kind of comments? But so if you have one of those, say that. If you don't say no.
Yeah, it's not. No, I think for the students, I guess, when people try to, I mean, we kind of got into this political thing, but I mean, there may be a difference between being political and being sort of relevant. And so this kind of transdisciplinary attitude, I think some of you picked up on in a lot of your work that's relevant outside of the discipline, I think is something to really pursue and keep going with. And it doesn't have to just be, I know that the only things that feel relevant today are like critiquing, you know, Trump and the violence of capitalism and all these things that we are critiquing, but you can engage with the world in other ways besides that.
I'll drop another bomb. I know. So, you know, I think so what's interesting to me is what you just said about sort of disciplinariness, and I think, you know, this is such a thing with students, you know, and faculty and professionals is, you know, the disciplinariness of our fields. I'm a landscape architect and environmental planner, We have our own disciplinary tendencies, architects do too. You know, and so what we do is we build these fortresses. We commission architects to build, in this case, a building within a building that we're all sitting in right now. So we're double fortressed into our own world. And I think the interdisciplinariness comes from when, you know, we teach students not to do this. You know, why do architecture schools all have their own buildings and no one ever leaves them, for example? I've always been amazed by this. You know, a new dean comes into a school, the first thing they want to do is raise money to build a new building. And I keep, not you, no, not you, not you.
Could I give you just to give you a pragmatic answer? The reason we say this building is we have our own cafe, we have our own wood metal shop, we have our own supply store, we have great faculty, great students, and great administrators. Why would we want to leave?
I wouldn't want to leave either. I mean, but I will tell you this, that, you know, I'll just say this, that I used to get in trouble as a junior faculty member when I walked out of the GSD, when I taught there for 6 years. I was yelled at and I was told never to leave, okay? And I would leave to go talk to other schools and talk to other professors, and my most interesting projects came from those collaborations. Now I'm at MIT, where there's no building. The people next to me are nuclear scientists. There's no building for architecture and planning. We're all in one gigantic building, every discipline, except maybe the business school. They're separate. And you bump into people, it's interdisciplinary. And it's all spatially, the thing is, it's all spatial. It's all our discipline doing this or fighting this. And I find it really interesting that what you're describing is a real cultural problem. And we have to work next to people who aren't like us. And that's how we discover what they do, and we have to do it in a very generous way, and that's what starts to make new things. That's how I feel about it. I've lived it, I've experienced it, and I'm with you. I think it's wrong, the way we sort of isolate ourselves. I think it leads to singular disciplinary kind of outlooks.
But you don't isolate yourself, and we do. That's
Can I say one more thing?
right.
I don't isolate myself.
To kind of take that idea like into like architectural form, I think what you were saying about the Chicago school and the sort of like postmodernism thing coming back, I think we need to be really careful not to make the same mistakes the first postmodernists made, which was to focus so much on architectural history as the sort of reference point for all of that, whatever we're doing, and to look outside the discipline to maybe new languages that bring in new kind of ideas and transdisciplinary things.
Any other final?
So I think one of the quiet things that's happened over the last 10 years, and maybe this is a bomb too, is that, you know, education as a whole has become a commodity. And you know, you are consumers of education and we are providers. And in that sense, you know, customer service becomes an issue amongst faculty. I mean, you know, if you know, don't like the way you're being taught, you know, there's lots of ways that you can say that. I mean, I appreciate the comments about, you know, the thesis by definition being a kind of vertical structure that doesn't lend itself to sort of lateral movement, lateral thinking. I mean, that's a comment. I hope that there's third years, you know, second years in the room here, that as thesis goes on and you're sort of thinking about it, that, you know, Matt used the word, you know, taking agency. I think that's one of those phrases that we use all the time that I don't know that everyone else knows exactly what that means, but taking agency means that, you know, we all work for you. You know, you all pay our salaries, and you know, as you sort of come up, especially in higher ed, that voice, you know, if it's a political voice, if it's a voice about what architecture means, really ultimately has to come from the students, and the faculty, I think, have to be reactive to that. And we're moving into a kind of a reactive phase as opposed to being into a very strong proactive phase. I think that's a good thing.
Julie Larson is here to make the final comment.
Really good. I completely agree with you. I think a lot of us faculty really do use thesis as an opportunity for the students to really kind of show their own voice because they spent 4 years plus, you know, being able to kind of delve into what we were interested in, and then they have to make their own assessment. And to go back to the disciplinary question, I have a really great friend, Gail Fulton, who's a landscape architect I've worked with a number of years. I work with a lot of, is this on? I work with a lot of different companies, and I'm always trying to reach out beyond my discipline, but the one thing that I want to give ownership and agency to the students is that everybody is looking for our agency in the work. We are amazing designers, and these students are really incredible thinkers. And And I think that they bring that to a transdisciplinary discussion, an interdisciplinary discussion. And I think they can do that because they delve so deeply.
Here, here. That was a good moment that I actually get to make the last comment. Which is only to say that I want to thank you all for coming today. Thank especially the students, those who are here and those who are not here. Thank the instructors and the faculty, advisors. Thank our visiting critics for dropping so many bombs today. We love that. We're happy about that. Really terrific to have you all here. The results of the voting today will not be known until graduation day. Those will be tabulated by Caldwell, Speaks, and Hanson, an accounting firm we hired. Tabulate these on Monday. And we'll hold on to those. As you know, there'll be three prizes, or three. There's a faculty prize, a visiting critic prize, and then a joint prize. We're both voting. Thank you all again, and enjoy the rest of the weekend.